The first article is kind of a big one, I know. It's about following the lead. One of the most important concepts that my father really kind of brought into his work creating Floortime and making it child-centered. Unfortunately, the reason I wrote this is because so many people misinterpret this fundamental technique, which really is one of the three fundamental techniques of Floortime, right? There's follow the lead, challenge, and expand. And challenge and expand are actually somewhat synonymous because you challenge and you'll expand the challenge, right? So expanding is a type of challenge, essentially. But everything hinges on following the lead effectively because that's going to build the relationship. It's going to create the fun. It's going to establish that connection. You're going to join the child's world and hopefully create a shared world by following their lead. But so many people think that this means you just do whatever the child's doing, and that's just not the case. Any different than it would be if a child picked up a pair of scissors, and we're going to play, you can play toss the scissors or scissor tag. No, certain things that are healthy and unhealthy for a child to do. And with following the lead, we're still applying that concept just in a broader perspective, right? We now know that there are activities that are more adaptive and social for a child and more self-involving. We know there are certain experiences, whether it be screens or self-involved play with visual objects, that can be detrimental when we access too much. So why don't I open the floor, though, since I'm hoping you all have some questions or comments. Who would like to start the conversation about this article? Question or comment? Any bet. Come on, somebody get the ball rolling. One of you wonderful parents or professionals. Sylvia, did you want to say something?
Wait. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I had car trouble with my engine. I just fixed it, so that's why I'm late.
No.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm glad you fixed it. But did you want to? Thank you for joining us with such troubles. Did you want to share any thoughts or questions about the article?
Actually, I wanted to say that I read it a long time ago because I told you every time I read your articles, I can't stop and I go from one to another.
Through the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I wanted to say that especially the one about following the child lead, I really love it because for me, it is so meaningful because instinctively I was trying to do something like this from the beginning. Who are therapists here. I have a almost 6-year-old child.
Okay.
They were always trying to force him to do, like, they were always saying that they were teaching him.
Right.
But for me, it always felt like it was more like forcing him to do something that he's not interested in that much.
Right.
So I really always try to do, follow his lead and trying to see what he's interested in. But I have a lot of difficulty when it comes to the sensory stimulation. That his favorite kind of games he's a sensory seeker, so he's all the time jumping, and we have to throw him in the air and play monster games. So I'm always trying to sort of extend it with just one more thing that he can at that point like maybe accept. Like we're playing a game where we're blowing up balloons, imaginary balloons, and then for the first time it was so amazing for me. I showed him the balloon to blow it, and then he pretended to blow. And for me, that was like I didn't expect him to do that.
What you're saying is he chose to blow it. He figured out to blow it because he saw you do it and wanted to do it because he saw mommy do something fun.
Yeah, like he could see the imaginary balloon. Like he understood that it's like you can blow in an imaginary balloon, and I thought that was a great thing. But in general, I have a great difficulty because here there are no Floortime therapists in general. Like everyone is doing ABA, and they don't understand why I want to be in the sessions. They don't understand why I don't want it to be flashcards. So in general, and now he's almost 6, so they're telling me that because he's school age, he has to go to this kind of therapy. So
We use,
they
I
are
mean,
not
so
following the lead.
one of the reasons why I'm putting all this content out there, and again, I'm not just talking about floor time. I mean, this article is specific to floor time. So many other articles only mention floor time briefly, but really talk about these bigger concepts that apply and should apply for all versions of kind of therapy and education. And so one of the things I actually wanted to tell the group is please share these articles with the people you're working with, other therapists, other educators, and certainly the people who are hardcore ABA, don't share with them, not right away. So maybe find some more moderate people at first to ease into it, and maybe they can support you. Because one of the challenges we all run into, and I was just talking to Ashley, who's who runs a school and is a speech therapist in Texas, and we were talking yesterday about how we have to educate the community and how educating the community is difficult, right? And unfortunately, we can't always do it ourselves, but we have to plant seeds. We have to share information. And unfortunately, what I've found, I use these articles internally for training our staff, because if I'm the one saying it, just in a conversation, there's a natural sometimes resistance that we have to doing something different and new, especially when we perceive it as one person's idea, right? But when we see something laid out as part of a broader framework, number one, but two is having evidence that's not just supported by my opinions, right? I mean, there's science behind this stuff. Again, it's not hard science. I'm not saying these are double-blind control group studies, but it is evidence nonetheless. And so if we can provide this to members of the community, especially more open-minded people, I think you'll find some movement there. And again, it may not be as much as we need right away, but it's a step. But most importantly, what we tell all parents, especially in other countries, is let's create our own program, right? Let's find some young professionals who might even still be in university or just fresh out, who haven't been tainted by this, perception of what's been there for so long that we have to keep doing, right? And let's educate them. And I've found those professionals, and again, some wonderful older professionals too, for those of you that are not in the young group. But those types of people are going to be the next leaders, right? And if we can get in the beginning with them and they start their own center in a couple of years, now we've got a place that supports this, right? And certainly if there's ever anybody you meet who you think would want to talk about this, I'm always happy to chat.
I read the Overcoming ADHD Without a Pill just recently, and I love that one as well so much.
Good. Oh, thank you.
It was so comprehensive, and actually a few things we started doing like that. We also hired someone who's playing with our son according to like this kind of
doing more of the executive functioning type activities and stuff. But
and in general, like I really love it how I'm sorry, I don't want to hijack the whole
No, this is what this is for, Sylvia, please.
I really love it that is like there are even details on how mom should take care of herself, how dad should have special time with the child, and so it goes into so many details. And there was one thing that I wanted to ask actually, but again, it's not exactly related.
Please use the platform.
That my son doesn't really like. It's very hard to get him to do something that we are trying to do, like let's say the evolution movements. So you want him to see there first and then crawl, and unless I'm guessing if I'm super duper playful, maybe I can get him to do one of those things, but to actually improve from one to another, it's really hard. And I'm wondering if this is what is blocking him from progressing really fast, because right now, like there's some sort of a skill missing there or interest missing there. I'm not sure which one.
And so a lot of that comes down to figure out the why, right? You're asking the question, why is he not able to do these things? And is this why affecting other areas of growth? And that is often the case, right? We have to figure out why a child can't do something, isn't doing something, to address it. We can't just keep pushing it, as you're saying, because he's either going to get upset by it or then resist it or whatever it is. But the key ingredient, sometimes we can't, I mean, you and I'm happy to have a chat outside of this and we can talk about more explicitly why and maybe brainstorm a little bit and do a little analysis. But most importantly, take what he's doing and don't think about the activity as having to be done the right way. Think about the activity as an inroad, an open door, a medium through which we're going to be connecting with him and playing with him. And if we create our own animal movements, right? Or you find a movement he likes, the slithering, right? But he doesn't like the bear walks or something else, right? Or whatever, or the monkey walks,
Yeah.
right? Whatever it is, stick with the slithering. But now you're two slithering snakes just slithering around the floor, playing a game, chasing each other. That is
Mhm.
still beneficial, right?
Yeah.
And start there. And then all of a sudden, the snake wants to crawl up on the couch and has to use his arms and legs. Well, now the snake is a salamander, right?
Yeah.
and now we're we're a lizard, right? We're evolving, right? So
Yeah.
make it natural. Do it outside where you might have equipment if you don't get too dirty, right? But don't think
I
about
think
the
so.
activity, right? Think about the process. Okay.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
but I'm glad you highlighted. But one of the things you said in the beginning, I want to touch on, is this concept of doing what a child wants to do versus our kind of understanding of the child's needs, and how do we always balance these two things, right? We know we need to challenge a child and push them sometimes, and we have to do that in a respectful way. But we also want to let them feel in charge and be in charge and make decisions and
Yeah.
be an active participant. And so it's always about finding that balance, right? I mean, that's what the following the lead is. And if ever, and this is one of my father's main principles, if ever we find that our expectations, our demands, or our challenges are leading to avoidance or lack of participation or disconnect from the child where they shut down, then we go back to following the lead, right? So
Yeah.
always think we're always oscillating between challenging and following the lead. And I was first learning this with my father, he would always say, never dip below 60% of following the lead, right? Every session of every day, try to keep the ratio at least 60% following the lead and only at most 40% challenging. That way, it's always going to be the majority fun, enjoyable, and within the child's decisions.
Yeah, I think this is a good point, but because you see that afterwards he wants to do it again.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they usually say, okay, it's not fun to play with you.
Exactly. Yeah, you want him coming back for more. The irony is, we don't want to give him we don't want to satisfy all of his play-based needs. We certainly don't want to push him away from it. But the irony is we always want him to want a little bit more, right? Instead of 20 pushes on the swing, we're giving him 5, so he asks for more, right? Instead of tickling for 20 minutes, we're giving him little tickles, so he pulls us in for more, right? So we're always wanting him to have more. Absolutely.
But here, can I ask something? Like
Yeah.
here, I'm always wondering how can I set myself the right goals to, like sometimes it's so hard to think of something creative, like what is the next step here that I can expand on what he's
Right.
now interested in.
So what I always, the rules I go by, and this is kind of getting to the next, set of techniques, right? We're following the lead, which means we're having fun, we're joining his world, we're creating a shared world, we're bringing in affect, we're bringing in sensory input, right? By that alone, we should have a game. If for some reason the interaction doesn't happen there, we're going to challenge a little bit at the same time. And actually, just for those of you who haven't seen, I just put up a new article yesterday called it's all about the basics of Greenspan Floortime and how we can still challenge while being respectful of neurodiversity. Okay. And really what it talks about is a technique that we use a lot called that I'm calling knocking on the door. And it means we're giving more sensory and emotional input to let the child know we're there, not to force them, to do something with us, but to let them know we're there, and let them know we're playful, and let them know we're physical, and let them know that we're there to fulfill their needs, even if they're not evidencing a need right away because they're stuck in a toy or stuck in an object. When we're challenging them, though, we have to be very gradual. So instead of thinking about how do I expand this into a new activity or something more complicated, think about how do I add one new layer to this, one new step of expectation. So my child is nonverbal, the step might be another gesture. If my child is verbal, the step might be another word or another phrase or another answer to a question, depending where their language is, right? If they're in the middle there somewhere, they got some language, but they're still working on pre-verbal communication, we're doing a little bit of both. But the idea is we're looking for just 1 or 2 extra circles of communication every time. If we do that consistently, we're getting all these baby steps that turn into one big step. And that's that's the expansion. But we as adults don't realize what a baby step is to a child, right? His baby steps are smaller than our baby steps by size, from a literal standpoint, but also from perception. His perception of challenge is going to be so much more sensitive than our idea of a challenge, right? And so I've worked with kids and I've seen this in the most blatant ways where if they're playing with a toy and they're very stuck in this little space and I move the toy 3 inches, they look at me and grab another toy. But if I move the toy 1 inch, they look at me with a smile and they put it right back. So 1 inch was the manageable challenge. 3 inches is too much of a challenge. Well, to me, they're barely different size, distances.
Yeah.
But to the
Yeah.
child, that's 3 times as much as far, right? So we need to make sure we're thinking about it, we're paying attention to how they're perceiving the challenge. And sometimes our ideas of challenges can just be too big, and it's not. But we'll get there. But just think about smaller versions.
Yeah, actually, ever since I started listening to the podcast, these chats as well, like I realized prompting is so easy to come, and I'm fighting it really, like especially when it comes to verbal. Like this, just one more word that I need from him, and it's so hard not to say the word, but try to do the who's doing the thinking, right?
It
like,
is. I'm so glad you're grabbing onto those concepts. But again, I always tell parents and professionals, you still want to be enticing without directly prompting, right? You're using your words, your energy, your anticipation, right? Your statements. And they're types. I mean, we can call them prompts. I don't care. I mean, they're kind of a type of a prompt because we're encouraging and enticing and stimulating a child to respond. We're just not telling them exactly how to respond, right? So keep it going. Keep that affect up. Keep enticing. Keep flirting with him, and and you'll get those responses. I promise. All right. But again, and think about if the response you're looking for, he's not giving it to you time and time again. Think about adjusting your expectation to breaking up the response into smaller steps or shifting it, right? If we're looking for a certain word, then maybe we try a different word for a little while. That means the same thing, right? So now he's the concept, instead of getting him to say push, which is harder than go, right? He's still getting the same concept, but push is a harder word to produce than go, go. So start with go, and then he understands that when he says go, the swing goes. And now all of a sudden, when you start working on the word push, because it's part of a fun exchange, you say, oh, I'm going to push, here I go push. And you stop saying, what do I do? All of a sudden, he's now paying attention to what it all means, and that's context.
Yeah, this is very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any other thoughts or comments? I mean, what did people think about? I mean, some of the main pieces of this article, why I wrote them, one of them is to dispel this idea that waiting and observing is actually following the child's lead. A lot of Floortime people out in the community think that they're supposed to wait and observe. Now, just so you all know, this was never my father's concept. When he wrote this, he even wrote negatively about it in Engaging Autism, said we don't want to wait and observe because we're essentially allowing the child to kind of disconnect further and possibly even self-involve further in that disconnection. So, because timing is everything. Who has thoughts about that piece? I know does anybody want to comment on that?
I'll comment.
Please. I know you will, actually.
Because I was a professional that was taught that before working with Jake. And, in my mind, I was thinking, wow, me waiting is being so affirming to their needs and giving them time to process. And, once I kind of started learning how the waiting is just honestly, really hurting them, I've seen so much progress in the kids. And you kind of touched on just the self-involvement, and that, is huge for me because they can, as you're waiting to see what they're going to do, they're already self-involving in some other little toy or a speck on the ground. And you've lost all that time of having a meaningful engagement with them because you're just waiting for whatever reason. And I think, that is a key thing. And it's something that I always, now that I know, I always talk to parents about that. And it's not that we're just bombarding kids or we're not giving them enough time to process the language. We're still respectful, but it's keeping them in this meaningful engagement and, just having this continuous flow with them.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And that reminded me of something my dad said to me once, actually, is that, with the goal, of helping a child really connect and build relationships and relate, the the goal of helping a child stay engaged, sustain engagement, is so much more important than I think people often emphasize, because we think of engagement as something we need to kind of address and encourage, but we as adults, unfortunately, think a little too much about having downtime, because we think about our own perspective. Well, we need downtime. We need time alone sometimes. And while all of that is true, and children do need their own downtime, the question is, do we need downtime that reinforces kind of some of our bad habits, if you will? And I do call being self-involved, not alone time, but being self-involved a bad habit, because it's actually reinforcing parts of the brain that are similar to addiction. Right. And so it's not actually rewarding us in the same way as, having coffee with a friend, calming us, or even reading a good book, where we can go into fantasy land as an adult. But instead, it would be like us engaging in addictive behavior to calm ourselves down, because we developed that as part of our habit. And so we need to see what it's doing neurologically, not just what we want to think of it as therapeutically and behaviorally. Sorry, Ashley, do you want to say something else?
No, I was just gonna, I'm agreeing with you. I think, like, even scrolling on social media, people think, oh, I'm gonna have downtime, I'm just gonna scroll on social media and it's my time to kind of do something alone. But really, it's dysregulating you at the end of the day. And it's like that with kids, that maybe you're picking up a little toy and just kind of holding it and looking at it and doing their own thing. They're not getting regulated. Their sensory system is not getting what they need during that time.
Absolutely. So one of the things my father used to always say is, if you're going to have downtime, now again, it's not possible to always do this, but if you're going to have downtime where the child's still engaged. You can cuddle, right? You can read a book to them at this point, but they're still listening or connecting to you in some way. They're still aware of your presence and enjoying your presence, even if it's just physical proximity, and they're phasing away from you, but you're cuddling and they're the little spoon. That's still connection, right? You don't have to be engaging with them in a significant back and forth all the time. So that can be downtime. It doesn't have to be you. It could be, a sibling. It could be a grandparent. But helping a child who has an area of weakness, like engaging, sustain using that skill, really use that wiring to strengthen it, is necessary. I mean, it would be, I once, I've had numerous orthoscopic surgeries, right? And so my knees and ankles from playing basketball many years are in pretty bad shape. But one of the things the doctor told me, he was like, well, one of my injuries left me in a wheelchair actually for about a month from bad car accident years ago. And he told me, well, you're not going to really start making significant progress with rehab until your bones heal and you can start walking consistently again. Because the once or twice or 3 or 4 times a week of me doing rehab, the more intensive part, wasn't being supported by the daily activity of continuously using the muscles by walking. So if we're not continuously using these things, even though we don't need to be constantly pushing ourselves with them, they don't fully get mastered. They don't strengthen as much. We need to sometimes constantly use these things to master them. Then once I start walking consistently, if I want to sit down and have a day on the couch, it's not going to be detrimental. But if I'm not back to walking yet, and I sit down and just don't want to take a couple of days off and sit on the couch, it's going to be more detrimental, right? So once we reach a level of proficiency, we can take a slightly more simple path, right? Or easygoing path. But we have to get up to that point of proficiency. All right. Any other comments or thoughts about following the lead? All right. Well, let's move on to the next article.